Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Vandermark, and this is the Options series presented by Experimental Sound Studio and their quarantine concert program. ESS is doing concerts almost every single night, supporting musicians through online performances during a period where regular concerts aren't possible, and the money raised through donations during these performances go to the musicians. Tonight and this afternoon, depending on where you are, we have Ab Baars performing solo. This is the first concert on the Option series that's going to be broadcast from Europe, and we hope that a lot of listeners in the EU are catching this live. And tonight we'll be rebroadcasting this event for Chicago, U.S. listeners at 8 p.m. Central Time. Before we start, I'd just like to remind everybody that things are in a context that are very extreme right now, and music is happening in that context. So please keep pushing back against an institutionalized paradigm that's been problematic here in the U.S. and also in conversations with Ab just now throughout the globe. So many thanks to everyone who's working to make this world a better place. Let's make sure that the news cycle doesn't eliminate the causes that need to be supported and the solidarity that we need right now, particularly in this moment for the movement for Black Lives. Ab, thanks for being here. Thanks for presenting the music. It's great to see you. Even with Skype, it's nicer than in my basement. It's great. As you know, I'm a huge fan. I'm super excited to hear what you're going to be playing today. And you sent me a set list that you put together. And the first piece is for Von Freeman. And before we listen to the music, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the impact Von Freeman has had on your music, what it was like when you came to Chicago and got to see him play. Von Freeman, for those of you who maybe don't know, is one of the key figures in the history, not of just Chicago jazz, but definitely in the history of the music period. Very special, important figure in his work and his support of other musicians. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that and your perspective about that'd be great.
Well, that goes back a long time. I remember when I was 20-something that a friend of mine played me a record of Von Freeman, and I was totally confused. I had never heard somebody play like that. And it took a while before I liked what I heard, before I understood what I heard. And
if you don't mind me interrupting, Ab, just real quickly, what was confusing about it? Like, what was the register that was confusing?
Well, his out-of-tune playing, the lines he played going in and going out of a piece. He plays in the tradition, which is that he works with certain forms that have an ongoing, it's an ongoing movement of AAB, AAB, AAB. And there's certain ways you can play within that. And he was able to go outside these forms and go inside again, go out again. And I had never heard that before. And that was really inspiring to realize that it's possible if you play traditional jazz music, that there are people that feel that they have to go out in order to express what they want to express what they think and what they feel. And that was, well, quite inspiring. Yeah, I think of him as a fearless warrior, because he was very outspoken in his musical language, and he decided to develop that voice and not go for the big money, make records, and Yeah, always stay to himself, stick to himself, and play what he thought was necessary. And I have heard him a few times when I was playing in Chicago, and it was always a joy and a big inspiration to go to his club and see how he had everybody play and have a great night, and very inviting to all the musicians on the stage. There was no hierarchy.
Mm.
Yeah, I think these are some of the things that I can think of right now.
Mm. Hmm. Great. Well, what's the name of the piece?
It's called fun.
Okay, perfect. Ah, man, it's so good to hear you play. Thanks, Ab. That's, man, wow. Um, For those of you who may have just tuned in, this is Option, part of the Experimental Sound Studio programming and part of their quarantine concerts. We're listening to Ab Baars. I just played a piece called Vaughn for the great Von Freeman. Ab, you work for years doing lots of different solo music, and I've documented that work on a number of solo recordings. How do you perceive the solo music in comparison to your other work with the trios you've got and whatnot? I mean, do you look at it differently, or is it part of like the same process?
Well, the big thing is that it's all inspiring one another. If I play solo and I write music for that, I might use it later for my trio or for the ICP orchestra. If I write a piece for the ICP orchestra, I might also play it as a solo piece. I have to catch my breath.
Yeah, it's hard to go back and forth. Yeah.
So, and I love to be on my own too, and just develop and surprise myself and work with the mistakes if there are any. But I also love to work with other people and create something together with other musicians that inspire you or bore you or whatever.
I know that in the set you got obviously a clarinet piece coming up, and like you, I'm a huge fan of John Carter, and I know that you studied with John Carter. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about his music and the opportunity you had to work with him.
It was a real amazing period and very inspiring, and I feel really honored that I had the possibility to study with John, with a grant from the Dutch government. So I was in Los Angeles for 2 months, I think, 2-3 months, and I came there all on my own, and from day one I was part of the family. I was at his house. I got to know his wife, Gloria, and his daughter, Karen, his grandchildren. And I had to do a lot of eating and watching the World Series and a lot of other programs that Gloria, his wife, was watching, and he loved it too. And then I went to his studio every day to practice, and 3-4 times a week he would come by and we would play, and he would teach me, not in the traditional way that he had notes, books, and would explain me and say play this, play that, and then correct me or not. He would just play the exercises, and I would play them too, using my ear and imagination. And the interesting thing was that when he would play an exercise and he would make a mistake while playing the exercise, he would immediately stop and say, "Wow, what did I just do?" And he would analyze what had happened, and then he would make a little note or remind it because he had heard a nice squeak or a strange note that popped up. So he would immediately use that in his vocabulary.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that was a very nice way to see that happen right under your nose, and he being such an out of this world musician, that he would learn from mistakes and use them in his.
Well, I mean, because it's such a different process, because we're taught like a mistake, you get rid of the mistake.
Yeah.
And his integration of the mistakes into a vocabulary and codifying and being able to replicate the mistake to expand the vocabulary of what he could play is such a fascinating approach and more essential in a way, because the instruments can do so many different things, not just the conventional sounds. And he was a master at extended techniques. Wow, incredible.
Well, one side that most people don't know of John Carter. One day he said, "Tonight I have to." He came to the studio where I was practicing, and he said, "Ab, tonight I'm teaching at Aikido," and I didn't know what that was. Aikido. I thought it was a Japanese school, and that he was teaching clarinet to Japanese children. So I said, "Sure, I will join you." So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was standing in front of my hotel, clarinet under my arm, and he came in his pickup truck and started laughing. And I didn't know why he was laughing. So I said, "Okay, John, we can go." So he drove for half an hour, and he said nothing. And then we came into a sports school. And I thought, wow, that's a strange place to teach clarinet. Then I saw people coming in with hakamas, the black trousers, and in judo costume. And John disappeared and came out a totally different man. And it turned out that he had black belt Aikido. He had a black belt, and he was teaching. And it was an amazing change from the musician that I know to a very dedicated teacher. And
wow.
So yeah, and then when I got back home, I got interested in Aikido, which is a martial art, a Japanese martial art. And I walked in my neighborhood in Amsterdam, and a few blocks away from my house, I saw a school and it said Aikido school. So I went in and started taking lessons. And I rang him up and I said, "John, something has happened." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, so and so." And I came by this school, and I'm taking lessons now. And he said, "Wow, man." And I had the impression he thought that was even better than playing the clarinet that I was doing.
That's fantastic.
And he said, if we ever get together, then we should take lessons together. I come to your school, or you to mine.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that never happened. He died in 91. So
yeah, really early. Man. Well, thanks for that background. I didn't know about the Aikido thing at all until now. That's incredible. It's another side. You have a clarinet piece, speaking of John, that you'd like to play now?
I can speak. I can play a piece of his.
I
had something else in mind.
Yeah, anything you'd like.
It's called "And She Speaks."
Oh yeah, beautiful.
It's a ballad like this. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
And She Speaks. That's
Ab Baars, and She Speaks by John Carter. Wow, thank you very much. I love that piece so much. It was a great reading of it. Thanks. Would you like to do another clarinet piece? I kind of sidetracked you from your set list by going into a bunch of talk on John Carter, which was beautiful. Do you want to play another a clarinet piece now?
Oh yeah, we can. Something, a piece called No Ruku.
Okay.
No Ruku.
Beautiful. Tremendous. We're listening to Ab Baars live from his home in Amsterdam. And just a reminder, please donate if you can. The information is posted in the chat group, or you can go to ess.org. All the money goes to the artist, and this is no exception. What do you? I wanted to ask you another question. I got some lists, and there's some questions coming in too to put forth to you. You mentioned John Carter's interest in Aikido, and a friend of yours, I think you, John Corbett. Yeah. The question John's got related to that, is there anything from the martial arts that you have applied to your music? He says that Terry and he have always called called you a drunken master in reference to the Jackie Chan movies.
Welcome to my world. Well, that's something I only realized after doing Aikido a few years, that once you start doing Aikido, you work with everybody. So somebody who's there for the very first time, you have to work with, or somebody who's doing it for 30 years already. So that means that you have to be aware of your opponent, of the flexibility of the opponent, of the strength of everything. So you try to see the person you are working with, and if it's a beginner, then you work slowly. You be very careful, and you try to do all the movements as correct as possible and as fluent and without force. And when you work with somebody black belt or higher, then you know that you have to be very attentive because it's so fast. And so there's all sorts of dynamics going on. And I realized that I started using that in my music too, working with other people. That people give you something and you try to take it and use it and rework it and make music with it. So there's always giving and taking. And I think that doing Aikido made me aware of that. Is
That's
that
interesting.
clear?
Yeah, very clear, and very interesting too. Like I always find when I'm working, let's say investigating other art forms, it often gives me a reference that's very helpful to think about music. Because when I'm thinking about music, it's I'm so embedded in it. It's so much part of what I do. Sometimes I can't see the process with more objectivity. But if I look at a creative process from another angle, I can bring that back to the musical situation, kind of like you're talking about with the Aikido. I think almost all of the musicians I work with and know about have very strong passions outside of music, all different kinds of things, often with other arts. As I mentioned for myself, that's definitely the case. I know that you have a profound interest in poetry, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit before you play the next piece. I know, for example, the trio you've got with Kaya Draxler and Joe Williamson, which is called Fishscale Sunrise. The name of the group comes from a Wallace Stevens poem. For example, that's just like a reference right there. But if you could talk a little bit about why poetry is important to you personally and how it may impact your music or your thinking about music.
Wow, I didn't prepare this one. Well,
this is my ideal moment with you.
I think it goes hand in hand with looking for material that can be an inspiration. And I think you just described it, that experiencing other forms of art can make you look in a different way at your own art, in our case, making music. And I think reading poetry, reading it aloud, gives you a different idea of making phrases, rhythm, of length, and of silence too. Quite often I have a poem, I find a poem that I really like, and I put it at the piano. I have a whole pile of of poems that I copied, and they are somewhere at the piano. And sometimes I take it out and start reading the lines, and they give me an idea for a rhythm or a melody or yeah, they inspire me.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter whether it's old school poetry or contemporary poetry, poetry that I understand or don't understand. I like it all, and it's just the sound and the color and
Mm.
the images that it creates. Um, yeah, I think that's in short what I.
Just out of personal curiosity, could you mention a few poets that for you are like among your favorites? I'm just curious because Wallace Stevens obviously has some significance, not least of which the trio's name comes from one of his pieces. But are there others in particular?
Well, there's some Dutch poets that I like very much. In fact, the next piece that I'm going to play is a Beethoven sonata, piano sonata. And Ik Henneman, my partner and viola player, and I, together with Dutch poet Anneke Brassinga, we did a project together a few months ago because of the 250th birthday of Beethoven this year. And she had written a series of 9 poets inspired by the Klaviersonate, a late piano sonate of Beethoven. And so we made a program. We arranged little parts from this piano sonate, and she was reciting the poetry, and we would play little fragments in between or played longer solos or pieces inspired on a few bars taken from that sonata. And so I also did a tenor solo based on a few bars of that piano solo. And it's called, no, it has no name, it's just called Beethoven Grande Sonata, Opus 106, Hammerklavier.
Okay,
Oh.
beautiful.
Yeah?
Yeah, definitely beautiful. Thanks, Ab. I've never heard Beethoven like that. It really transformed. Amazing, amazing. I got a question while you're catching your breath from Air Column, and the question is: I was hoping you could talk about your album "And She Speaks," especially the relationship between the source material, Naima, say, and your remix, Anima Blue Sapphire. I'm also curious about your relationship to color, something you've used in titles throughout your career.
And the solo album, yeah, sorry, I had to think. Yeah, my whole life I've been listening to the great masters of jazz and improvised music, the great saxophone players, the trumpet players, the piano players, the orchestras, and because they mean a lot to me and they inspire me. Great saxophone players like Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Von Freeman, Rollins. These are all incredible individualists with a very personal language. And of course, I played it in many situations. I studied it, and I never found a way to. No, I always found it difficult to combine it with going into the material, going out of the material. What we discussed in the beginning, what Von Freeman is a great master in that. And but I think 2 or 3 years ago, I felt comfortable and as if I was at a point where I could combine those two worlds, playing traditional music but giving it my own vision. And I also had the feeling that I could express myself in a way that belonged to me and that was personal and honest. And so for that reason, I decided to. And sometimes on some of the pieces, I stay really close to the original material, to the original melody, the chord construction. But others, like I play Body and Soul on clarinet. And what I did that might sound strange, was inspired by Cecil Taylor,
Uh-huh.
because he often uses big jumps on the piano, which is one of his characteristics in his playing. And I thought, if you put the melody, but put all the notes in different registers, so like da da do da do da da, you can also do da la 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 la. So you can create with the basic material, you can create a totally new world.
Mm-hmm.
And with that idea, I approached the whole project. And yeah, the colors. Yeah, I always I find colors. They add something to the way you look at things. When I hear Ben Webster, I hear dark brown. When I hear Jimmy Lyons on alto saxophone, I hear something yellowish or silverish. Uh, that's how I try to listen to things, and not just hear it as music, but as something way bigger than what it is. And that so for that reason, I thought it might be nice to to add colors to the pieces as a feeling that I used when I played them.
Uh-huh. Okay. And when you say like with Ben Webster and Jimmy Lyons, this color association, is that an association with the tone of their horn, or does it also include the language, their own personal language? Is it like just the sound that creates the color connection, or?
Yeah, the sound and the lines they play. I think
It's like a whole era. It's the whole personality of the
yeah,
approach.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I remember when I was just beginning studying the saxophone, I was obsessed with the sound, and I was always looking for a sound that was dark, almost like marmor. Is that a word? Marble, like marble,
Oh, yeah.
thick
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
dark. And it sometimes happened that I was cycling or walking on the street, and that a car came by that had exactly the sound that I wanted on my saxophone. So I would run behind the car just to hear this thick, massive sound. And I thought, wow, man, if I could play that on my saxophone. And even then, I thought in terms of thick and dark and yeah, something like marble, dark blue. These kind of uh, thoughts came up when I.
Okay. That's fascinating. Like how we perceive, how different people perceive sound. Like
Oh
in the
yeah,
case of
yeah.
associations or other kinds of associations, incredible. In the set list you've got that you sent me, if I'm following it correctly, the next piece was shakuhachi. Is that correct?
Yeah, shakuhachi.
Could you talk a little bit, not only your interest in the instrument, the shakuhachi, but if there's a broader interest in Japanese culture and history, where that comes from, how you think about it, how it affects your music at all?
Mm. Well, first of all, um, I've been listening to uh, traditional Japanese music and still listen to it, and especially the the music written for large orchestras. These were not the traditional orchestras like we know in the West, but orchestras made from traditional Japanese instrument. A lot of percussion, string instruments, wind instruments. And from the very beginning, I always felt connected because there was, I listened to it as if it was improvised music.
Mm.
And I think that has to do with the fact that Japanese music is often based on the breathing. Making phrases depends on the breathing, the lines they sing, and it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. For example, I'm exaggerating, but and the way, yeah, they make sounds and colors and the notes they play. I always thought, wow, man, every improviser from the West should listen to this, and because it's filled with ideas and things that you can be inspired by. Let inspire yourself. And then, of course, there was the Aikido. And I decided to travel to Japan in 2005 on my own for a month, travel around the country.
Wow.
And I knew a dancer from Amsterdam. She was living in Japan. She had gone back. And so through her, I was able to do some performances. And she also contacted some musicians, traditional musicians from Gagaku orchestras.
Wow.
And after one of the concerts, a man came up to me and said, I hear you are interested in shakuhachi music. Come to my shop tomorrow. I have a shakuhachi. And I knew nothing. I went there the next day, and he had 4 or 5 shakuhachis, and it was a pawn shop. So these were all old instruments, and did I know? So I took out the regular size, which is 1.8, that is about 51 centimeters, and I started playing it, and he said, no good, you're a big man, you need a big one. So he gave me a big one, and I remember the following days I was playing it, practicing it, and you know how I practiced on the Ethiopian flute for days. I couldn't get a sound out of it. Well, same in Japan. And then after a few days, I got a sound out of it. And then coming back in Holland, there's no tradition. There's no one who teaches it. And lucky, I found an old man in Leiden, a city near Amsterdam, and he was teaching shakuhachi. He was a self-made player, and he saw my instrument and he said, "What's that?" And it turned out that it was completely out of tune and it was broke. And so this guy had just given me something. But well, it started a new life, in fact, because I started to study Japanese traditional music for shakuhachi, and it's so different from Western music, the Western way of thinking about music. And I noticed that it's coloring my tenor playing, it's coloring my clarinet playing, and so yeah, it's really a whole new chapter in my life.
Okay.
And, well, I started using it more and more in my improvisation groups. So besides studying the traditional repertoire, these pieces are called honkyoku, and there are about 38 or 39 pieces that have been developed over the centuries. And that's the language you learn. And normally you study with a master, so you sit opposite each other, and the master plays, and you imitate without any written music. And after a few months, you have been listening and repeating what the master plays, and you know a piece. And then you go to the next piece. And after 20 years, the master says, okay, now you can go away and you can find your own way. So you stick to the tradition. You don't go to another teacher. You don't go to another school. You just, that's the traditional way of studying it. And so I'm totally wrong, a delinquent. Because I started improvising on it. I took lessons from a lot of different people, and that's the way I had to learn it.
Yeah. You have your own path. Hey, everybody, you're listening to Ab Baars from his home in Amsterdam. This is the Option Series. Every Monday we have live online performances. This particular performance will be rebroadcast at 8 p.m. Chicago time. Please check it out and re-listen if you're hearing it now. Again, please donate. Go to ess.org or check out the link in the chat room. All the funds go to the musicians, as do the funds for all the quarantine concerts that ESS organizes. Huge thanks to Experimental Sound Studio for what they're doing for musicians all the time, and especially during this period where no regular concerts have been possible. Big thanks to Alex Inglesian, who's an amazing engineer and is helping us today behind the scenes. Ab Baars, and this is a completely improvised piece, is that correct? For Chicago? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. And this is Ab Baars. Thank you, Ab. We're listening to Ab Baars. We're kind of running out of time, but before we go, as a music fan, I really would like to ask you if you could talk a little bit about Misha Mengelberg. There's a piece in your set of Misha's, and I was hoping that maybe we could conclude with that after, some thoughts you have. You worked with him with so many years in the ICP orchestra, and he's such a monumental figure in the history of jazz and improvised music. If you would talk about him a bit before playing this piece of his, that would be really, really special.
Sure. Well, where do you start when talking about Misha?
That's why I handed it to you.
Yeah. I'm looking for one moment.
Yeah,
I
sure.
can read a poem that I wrote after he had passed away in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
It is a poem that I think tells about how I see Misha. The poem has expressions that he would use in conversations, titles of his pieces. It describes some of his movements, of his habits, of his. Is that okay if I read the poem?
Absolutely, that would be beautiful.
Yeah. So it's called Wardrobe, and Wardrobe is inspired by a piece that he wrote for a Dutch chamber ensemble, and that describes all sort of things that he has on top of his wardrobe, a statue, a tablecloth, an ashtray, these kind of things. So I thought it would be nice to start. So it's Wardrobe. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, coat, you sometimes floated, so beautiful, into the grand piano, and where you softly fell, teasingly yawned the strings, throw and rethrow. Harassed by ivory keys, our doggy grouses with muscles. Woof waff, woof waff, woof waff, waff waff. Perky as a Russian prince. O head, sphere of fans, were you lifted? Yes, then, dabbling blew away from it Igor, Tau, Principe di Venosa, Monk, Dada, Sea Chicken, Duke, rubber blades carefully sharpened, stingingly shiny, lusty pricking, sweet venom. A capital crime, yes, certainly. Murderous dream of dignified doings. Flip the flop, crino, ahoy. Oh, trousers, you could embrace, feathery, a proudly wore an embonpoint, benevolent rocking sausage and steak on counter-stressing wanky rhythms, sheep brains, Armagnac, ah, the contrapunctus hoovering useless, fat smoked herring from the school, bleeding in between gnawing virus, kedoof, kedoof, kedoof. Oh, plastic bag, inner reminder, stroll with Misha, and so on. Always and so full of patience, white disposable handkerchief, and therefore dusty the tears. Ah, bag, you are lying somewhere now. To be quiet, but maybe you have seen them, the hares, flying, which he sometimes spoke about. There are also those who become winged. They then leap from branch to branch. They flutter to the hills. There they feel quite at ease. For Misha.
Thank you, Ab. That was really, really beautiful. We're going to conclude. I think this is a piece of Misha's next. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little ditty, little something, and it's called Another Day Has Passed. Again, one from a long line in which light and dark abide, chained side by side. Another day has passed. We linger on the border of the old and of the new, but now past. Good night, both.
Thanks, Ab. This is Ab Baars, and you've been listening to the Option concert series, which takes place on Mondays, usually Monday night, 8 p.m. Central Time. We're doing an afternoon concert, so European audiences can catch this, and Ab doesn't have to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning to play. Next week, Nat Baldwin will be performing, and Andrew Klinkman will be running the show. Thanks to Experimental Sound Studio and all the work they're doing with the quarantine concerts, to Alex Inglesian, and of course, huge thanks to Ab Baars. Thank you for being here, Ab. And
thank you for inviting me, Ken. It was wonderful.
I'm looking. Thank you. Okay, let's listen.
Weer is een dag voorbij. you.
Thank you so much, Ab Baars, and I think Geek had him in the background there. Hey, I can't wait to meet you in person and see you again and play. Beautiful to see you, Ab. Take care, and thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.